It's looking at the situation because I'd been dealing with Moses, and I was reading a lot about Moses because Moses does interest me in the way that God dealt with him. There's no question he was appointed and anointed from birth as a leader, a very miracle of his survival in the bulrushes, and the way that he was adopted eventually by the daughter of the Pharaoh. And in the short term, Moses' sister was able to persuade Pharaoh's daughter to use Moses' own mother to bring him up. Very, very significant in the circumstances. And we know the story of Moses. But I'm always intrigued and often preach on Deuteronomy 4, where Moses is explaining what he says is the greatest miracle ever seen on the face of the earth. And that was the crossing of the Red Sea. And he's quite adamant that no greater miracle has been seen from the beginning of time until then. And nowhere, anywhere in the world had anything as great been seen. And so I was moving on from Moses to Joshua. And of course, we know the story of Joshua and how in Joshua chapter 1, and I've got the book of Joshua open in front of me, and I'm actually going to recommend that I would encourage you to read the book of Joshua. I mean, I've always been very moved by, in chapter 1, when God is speaking to Joshua after the death of Moses and says in verse 5, chapter 1, that no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. And God says, as I with Moses, so I will be with you, and I will not fail you or forsake you. And you know, I take a lot of courage from that, because I believe that if God could say that to Joshua in addition to Moses, that I believe we can take encouragement and strength from that, where God says, I will be with you, I will not fail you, and I will not leave you. And despite all the difficulties in life, and even though we may make mistakes, and I'm very conscious of mistakes that I have made, yet God has always been with me and never failed me. But then looking beyond, of course, because we move on from there, because the first thing that Joshua has to do is to now take the children of Israel from the wilderness and conquer the promised land. So what you've got here is, I'm seeing something of a similarity in that the whole purpose of Moses' life was to bring the children of Israel out of slavery and bondage in Egypt. And I obviously, along with you, have spent a lot of time looking at that, and how that as part of the miracle, it involved the crossing of the Red Sea. And as I've already commented in Deuteronomy 4, Moses retrospectively, speaking to the children of Israel, says that was the greatest miracle ever seen until that time. But now moving on to Joshua, here God is promising that he will be with Joshua. And Joshua's task now, and of course you remember Joshua was in a special position because he was one of only 2 of the 12 spies who gave a favorable report about this land. You know that when the 12 spies went in to check the land and to examine it for Moses, when they came back, 10 of them said, oh, it's everything that God promised, but we can't take it because of the giants and because of the powerful armies there. But Joshua and Caleb are the 2 faithful ones who said, we see exactly, we agree in one sense with the 10 about their verdict, but if God is with us, nothing is impossible. Of course, we can take the land. And so now Joshua is given the task of fulfilling what he had said 40 years before. And remember, 40 years have passed. And so now he commands the children of Israel. And I've always been fully aware of this sense of the sequence, that Joshua sent 2 men into Jericho to spy it out. And we all know the story, how these 2 men went in and unfortunately they were discovered, and Rahab, the prostitute, if you want, actually hid them in her house and sent the pursuing forces out in the wrong direction. We all know that story. And as a result of it, Rahab was given a promise that she and all her house would be delivered when the Israelites came. But what actually interests me is what she says and what others say. She says here, this is chapter 2 and verse 10, starting in verse 9, she said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you in Israel. For we have heard, and this is interesting, I'm reading from verse 10, we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt.